Yeah, gotta aim for the top like, hold up. Yeah, I can never doubt myself, I know better. All of you critics be acting like you know better. Blowing the smoke, but I know when the dust settles that I'm in my element. It's evident that there's levels to the game.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. And this is part two of our conversation. We just ended part one. We discussed how the DOJ and the Department of Education has stepped in on the House versus NCAA settlement. And now we're going to move on to part number two, where it discusses offsetting the cost of a lot of the things that we just discussed. So revenue sharing is basically the hot topic that has been going on for a very long time since this House versus NCAA case was brought and since this settlement has now been brought to light. As we said in the first portion, there's a couple more hurdles that the DOJ is throwing into all of these things. However, it does not stop a lot of the different powers that be from throwing their hat into the ring of wanting a piece of the pie, or at least trying to offset how the pieces of the pie are going to be divvied up. And probably the most intriguing for me is it was a video that we had seen on Instagram. I think that I shared, and then started kind of digging into the rabbit hole of these things. But offsetting the cost of these things is potential of college sports ownership. And despite how you feel about it, it is a topic that is currently being discussed. And my initial thoughts of it were, if that happens, we might as well just pull these certain sports, mostly probably football and basketball, pull them away from the collegiate umbrella, and at least when it comes to the athletics part of it, and put them onto kind of their own revenue sheet, right? Because if we're going to start to talk about how private equity firms want to kind of throw their hat in the ring and start to buy into college sports, it's going to change things a lot, right? And an article that I read from CNBC, titled "Private Equity Looks to Buy into College Sports," and this came out in December of 2024, so just a little while back. I think we're about a month away from when this came out. It discusses exactly what we're looking at, right? And it discusses how the Power Four conferences generate 75% of the athletic revenue in those schools. And, that is the ACC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, the SEC, how much revenue they are generating for their schools. And, part of our conversation in our last episode, we discussed how the budgeting system has worked. And we use Texas Tech as kind of the rubric, because they shared a lot of their future budgeting of what they want to do. And as I said, 75%, roughly 75% of the revenue is brought in by these big name sports, by football. So that's what Texas Tech wants to do, with taking that revenue and pushing it into the sports that are generating it. But it's unfortunately not going to really work that way, as we discussed with Title IX coming into play. Now, in order to offset these things, it does look like private equity is potentially going to look at kind of throwing their hat in the ring. And, before we kind of dive too deeply into the details, Reid, what are your thoughts on private equity, or at least having some sort of sports ownership teams or sports ownership groups come into play in college sports?
Oh, I hate it. I hate it so much. I hate it so much. And I'll admit, like a lot of that has to do with my own personal mindset and philosophy on college sports, right? I think it's
Hmm.
it's the 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 myth is still alive for me in my mind of like it's sort of this last like great frontier of like highly elite athletics, still that era of amateurism, quote unquote, now at this point, in certain aspects that exist in there. But I think like I don't know, man. To me, like college is just such a like it's this last like it feels like this last kind of like untouched fan base that exists in there.
Hmm.
Like it just, I don't know, the brands themselves are strong. It's this connection to cities, to regions, to states. It's an avenue of higher learning. It develops, kids and adults. And I just, to me, getting private equity involved on the athletics piece is athletics is such a core component of the culture for so many people when it comes to the college experience. And I just having a select number of individuals who's, I mean, let's be honest, like you don't go into private equity to like have a good time and do the greater good. Like you do it to make money. So like all I can see is, the typical consultor mindset coming in and being like, all right, we need to come in here, slash the fat, a la non-revenue generating sports. So dump all that, pump whatever we can into this thing, spend money on, I would imagine, football and basketball for most things. If it makes money, we'll continue to aggressively move in that direction. If it doesn't make money, we'll dump it. And now we've essentially pump and dumped, a historic century-old program that exists in this space. We've left a region of, community of people that rely on this sport or this school or, have an attachment to that. Like, to me, it's giving so much consolidated power to one group whose goal is not to sort of, in my mind, invest and sustain a higher education institution. It's to
Hmm.
pull as much money as possible out of there, having no regard for what else they slash and affect within the school itself, and then ditch it immediately if it doesn't work out or doesn't pay off. Like that, I'm okay if you want to do that with like businesses, small groups, entrepreneurs. That people go into that knowing that's the name of the game. They agree to that social contract when they get into that space. I'm gonna go for equity, I'm going to go for investment, whatever it might be. If it works out, great. If it doesn't, I knew what I was getting into. I don't feel like schools that have been around since the 1800s, 1900s, that are staples of American society, staples of higher education. I don't, I personally just don't like that you've got these consolidated groups of investors coming in and potentially ruffling the feathers on that. That to me just it feels wrong, I guess, is the best way for me to put it.
Yeah. And to quote some things from this article, as I said, the article will be included in the summary section, so you guys can go and read this yourselves. But one of the quotes from Greg Carey, and I'll tell you who Greg Carey is at the end of this quote. He says, as a business, college sports, particularly football, is performing well and continuing to grow, which is why investors are looking at the asset class. Greg Carey is the global co-head of sports franchise in investment banking at Goldman Sachs. So it tells you who is particularly looking at college sports as the next big business, right? And also said in this article is, there's also the belief that business acumen from outside investors could drive profits even higher. And that's the thing where it's the reason profits need to be higher is because now they have to cut the workers into it. That's the thing about all of this is the workers being the athletes, the people that are, the reason people are coming to watch the games are the athletes. And now they have to be cut into a piece of the pie. So the pie is now being cut even more. So in order to offset those costs, they want to bring in people with business acumen to say, okay, this 22%, which if the DOJ has their way, will possibly be higher. But this 22% we already know has to go to the athletes. The rest of this has to go to us, right? We have to figure out how this is going to work, right? The other 78% of this, we need to figure out how to make this part grow. If we can make this part of the pie grow, that 22% will feel like a drop, like a rock dropping in the ocean. It won't really affect us because we have our ways of offsetting it with these TV deals, with potential NIL deals, with the sponsorships, with anything else that comes into play. So I, I'm I'm on the same page with you. I'm not particularly happy about private equity coming in and changing college sports. And it tells you that these institutions aren't being looked at as institutions of higher learning anymore. And if you truly think about it, like schools are way more than just the students that throw on a football helmet. I mean, I was on a college football team, and even though we would love to think that we are the biggest and baddest on campus, there's only what 80 of us, I think, at that point, maybe even 60 of us. Like that's the thing, is like you aren't the biggest on campus. People may know who you are more than your average other English major that was in classes with me. They may know me more than the kids that I went to class with, but that doesn't make up the majority of the school, right? And you're seeing tuition go up all the time as well. And it's just the business of education now. It's no longer the means to a job. It's rarely the means to a job. You're seeing so many people that are saying, I don't want to go into debt to get an education just so I have to get a job to pay off that debt the rest of my life. And that is part of the problem with education, is it's no longer, or at least these institutions are just no longer being looked at as the tool that they once were, right? The tool that college once was is gone. And with private equity now wanting to be a part of college sports, or at least looking at college sports, or having conversations with schools and saying, hey, here's where we can come in and help you offset the cost of the revenue sharing that you now have, where it used to be 100% of it was going to you, or 90% of it was going to you, and 10% had to go here. Now there's a bigger portion of it that has to go elsewhere. And private equity is like I said, coming in and saying, hey, we can help. And if you give us a little piece of this pie, we can make sure that the pie is a little bit bigger on your end too. And that's also going to change a lot of things with coaching. It's going to change a lot of things with another topic we discussed before, is, are these athletes employees? Because then they're subject to reviews, they're subject to firings, they're subject to a lot of other things that people who are truly employees are subject to. So for me, it's a very slippery slope to bring in private equity to invest in these things, because before it was donors, and obviously donors had a certain amount of pool, but now if you're bringing in private equity companies, it's going to be a lot different, and not in a good way.
Y- Yeah, what hacks me off about this, probably more than anything else, is like you're watching in real time somebody's mouth tell you one thing and then their fist punching you in the face with the total opposite of what they're saying. Like that's the part that, because exactly to your point, like, and again, this comes down to just probably a philosophical approach to higher education, college athletics as a whole, and that probably stems into a larger conversation. But like, if the private equity arguments for everybody is like, well, this is a profit arm of the university, the college sports has never been expected or intended to be a profit arm of a university. Yes, it's an extension of the marketing department in a way, right? If your team does well, it gets the attention, it gets admissions, great. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But the argument for college sports for so long is like, a feeling of community within the university, an opportunity for people that have special talents in certain sports to have access to higher education in certain places, funding opportunities for those kids. Like that's what it's always been. And the offset being, hey, we're going to get marketing dollars out of this because it's going to keep our alumni engaged. It's going to build fan bases in and out of our communities that make people want to come and be a part of this. That was always sort of the agreement of what athletics was going to be. And if you want to change what that definition is or change how you're going to use it in sports, that's fine. But you can't sit here and tell me that it's this amateur-based model, it's opportunities for kids, it's education, and then flip around and pump private equity dollars into the arm that you're talking about. That's ridiculous. So, exactly to your point, pick a lane, man. Like if it's going to be a profit thing, separate the revenue generating aspects of the sports, create an employment status for those individuals, allow them to collectively bargain directly with you as a university, and then yeah, get the money involved and see what you can do and rise it up. But don't throw tennis and track and field and swimming and baseball and pretty much every women's sport that exists in college. Don't throw it off a cliff and go, there's nothing we could have done. I mean, we can't, like, at the end of the day, we at X, Y Capital have to figure out a way to make money on this. We told you we were going to, that's why we're investing. That's what we want to do. And sometimes you just got to cut the fat. And that's what we're doing. We're cutting the fat. That's not what college sports is. And I think that if you explained it to fans of college sports and or anybody in that space, it's the whole thing of like hearing something in a nice catchy title is one way, but hearing how it's going to get done is a completely different way. I think if you ask people like, do you want access for, do you want more resources and access for college athletes? Yes, of course. Do you want to eliminate 90% of the roster spots for athletes so that the 10% of people remaining can make more money? No, like that's what, to me, when I look at that, I feel like there's no other way to draw the path of where that's ultimately going to go. It just doesn't, I don't know what else you can do in that space. And so really you have to make a decision as a school and as a association and everything else of like, what are we going to do? Like, are we going to decide that college sports is the thing that we want to sort of protect and keep under a very sort of unique and special zone? And yes, there's a lot of things we need to fix on there as far as like making sure kids are taken care of, making sure that roster spots and things are protected, making sure like that needs reform, like that needs looks. And we're seeing that attempted to play out on the House settlement side, at the Division I level while we're cleaning things up. But shoot, man, like why are we adding this whole other bomb into the equation? I don't get that. The only thing that I could maybe sort of consider is like maybe an opportunity for alumni of universities to buy in to a quote unquote stock exchange with their particular school. As an alumni, you could buy into a certain number of whatever. It goes in as a donation to support either the foundation or the athletics department or earmarked for something. Then probably you're running into a situation where, people are going to drive up enrollment like crazy so they can get more money, so they can get more money. Like there's going to be a way to screw that over as well, no doubt about it. But that's at least something where at least you have buy-in from people that are a part of the university. They care about the long-term well-being of the university and the athletics department. And the decisions being made would be done in mass with people that have that outlook in mind. They don't want, I'm just staring at Clemson's logo right now. Like it wouldn't be an outside source draining Clemson's resources to make their football team good. And if it works out, they make money. And if it doesn't, Clemson's athletic department is screwed. It would be people from Clemson who care about Clemson, that want the long-term success of Clemson, making decisions and putting money into places where they think it would help the school grow as a whole, because the reputation of the school is what maintains the reputation of their degree. If that thing gets diminished, then they're diminished, right? So I mean, so maybe there's a world where you have a buy-in on that, but I mean, I I I hate it so much. I hate it so much. The outside private equity, that's the one I
Yeah,
can't I
and
can't find a way where I like it.
I know, and to even to kind of piggyback off that, there's a quote from somebody else in this article that I'll let you know who says it at the end to kind of drive the point of why this is important. But he says there's a big opportunity to drive EBITDA, EBITDA be earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. So to drive that higher in college sports because there are easy ways to maintain quality while reducing expenses. And that was said by Erwin Kishner, a partner at a corporate department of Herrick Feinstein and co-chair of its sports law group. So, I mean, I understand the arguments, right? Where especially looking at that quote, they're saying, well, there's a lot of things that we can cut in order to drive, our income even higher. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of fat that needs to be that can be trimmed, right? And that means that people are going to lose jobs for one. I can remember when I went on a trip to UNC. I was doing a coverage there, and they have there's some schools that are fortunate enough to to have multiple weight rooms. Most of them do, but some of them that have multiple weight rooms, one weight room is for Olympic sports only. And we're in the Olympic sports weight room. And above the Olympic sports weight room on the second floor are academic advisors and just like more like advisory offices and things like that that are on that second floor. And that second floor was just lined with offices, like both back and forth on the hallways. Every single one of those offices, at least what I was told, were for were for advisors of the football team. And it was probably like 25 offices, maybe even more than that, that if I can remember correctly. Both sides of the hall, as I said, bunch of offices, and they were all for the football team. If they're going to be trimming the fat, and as I mentioned, Texas A&M earlier, or at least in our last conversation about how they came out and were already cutting people from their athletic department, that's something that I can see would be happening. Is they're going to be cutting into the educational portion of this. It's going to be cutting of tutors and cutting of academic advisors and stuff like that. The infrastructure is what's going to be chipped away at, so that they're going to say, what's the smallest amount of infrastructure that we need? How many of these different advisors can take on, instead of them taking on 5 students, can take on 10 or 15? That way, we'll be able to pay them more because there's less of them, so their salaries can go up, but their workload goes up, and their bandwidth also becomes lesser for these athletes. And like I said, when I read quotes like that about cutting expenses or keeping things at the status quo, right? Reducing expenses, while maintaining or driving the income higher. It's things like that that I'm thinking of, where it is the infrastructure of these athletic departments that is truly going to suffer. And like I said, I've been around athletic departments that had an abundance of resources and others that don't, right? And they are on the Division 1 level. So when we are talking about private equity firms coming in and joining the party, essentially, when it comes to college sports, remember, we're only talking about a handful of schools, right? Like, maybe not a handful, but we're only talking about a very small portion, the 1% of schools that are going to have private equity make any sort of investment, because those are the ones that are making money. So it's not going to affect a lot, but it's going to have a big splash, in my opinion, because if it's affecting one school on the finances that they now have, it's going to affect all schools. The only offsetting thing that I can truly think about is the roster caps, and how they can no longer have a certain amount of players. They have to make cuts, and how it may have some sort of trickle down effect to the Division 2, Division 3 level of athletes that cannot make a team at the Division 1 level and say, I'll go here for a scholarship to play the Division 2 level and have as good of a athletic experience as I possibly can. And who knows, if I play well, maybe I do get some sort of attention from the NFL. I mean, I'm paying attention to the Senior Bowl right now, and a big clip that's going around is a Division 3 O lineman completely stonewalling a Georgia defensive lineman. And the caption said, if it doesn't matter about division, if you can play, they'll find you, which isn't always true, but you're seeing that at play, where you're going to probably see more people that are that have that sort of athletic caliber that aren't going Division 1 anymore because they can't. And if private equity comes in and a certain amount of money is only going to a certain amount of people, it's going to change those things. And my hope is that athletes who can't get into their favorite Division 1 school don't just give up on it and they say, okay, I'm going to go Division 2, or Division 3 or NAIA, or maybe I'll do a year JUCO and try to transfer, whatever else, because we've seen the numbers on the amount of high school student athletes that play at the next level. It is very slim. It is not a lot. It is not a lot of players. And I can't even think of one sport on that list that I saw was above 25% of athletes that go on from the high school ranks to the and play on the college ranks at any level, right? So my hope is that those numbers don't diminish because there's going to be less, and I put that in quotes, less opportunity on the Division 1 level with these roster caps and having more money being pushed into the 1% of these schools. So again, I'm optimistic. I'm like you, and I don't like the private equity portion of this. I think it's not going to make things any better, um, because it's going to essentially turn college sports uh, into businesses. And even though we know that they're businesses now, they're going to become even more if things like this go on and things like this start to happen of private equity investing in the USCs or the Penn States or the Oregons or or whatever else. So we'll certainly see what happens, but um yeah, I'm with you. I'm against it, and I turn it over to you for any final thoughts, Reid.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, and you made a really good point about the educational aspect of it. Like, the whole point of getting people to college is to get them an education, and if we can use sports as a way to entice certain, I was that way. Like, I wasn't necessarily excited about college, but I was excited about the ability to play my sport in college and to be a part of that community and to push myself in that space, and that's what got me really to college and interested in going to classes and ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
I found a love for it while I was there and whatnot. But I think there's a responsibility in higher education, in education as a whole, to set these kids and any kids that attend these schools up for success. And because we know as adult people better than they do as aspiring, you know, bushy-eyed, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, wide-eyed 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. Because again, we forget they're children. Yeah, technically adults,
Yeah.
but like I wasn't doing anything of value at 18, 19 years old. Like I didn't know what to, I'm a kid. Like I just left mom's house. I'm trying to figure out how to make eggs. Like I don't know.
And
So
despite how eligibility looks, there's even though those years are going up, there the majority is still 18 to 22.
yeah, and I think people get confused too that like I mean some of those football players that I see on teams like they could be my dad. Like they look like they could be, but
Yeah.
like that doesn't change the fact that they are 18, 19, 20 years old. There's a responsibility, in my opinion, for people in higher education to understand that, okay, like I now know I went to Texas Tech University, I was on scholarship, played on the baseball team, okay, Division 1, power, at the time, Power 5 conference, now Power 4 conference, all this kind of stuff. There's not a human being alive right now that cares about what I did as a pitcher at Texas Tech University in the sense of it does not affect my livelihood. It does not affect the community that I have. It does not affect my salary. It does not affect, I mean, possibly tangentially in the sense that I'm in the sports space now. I found a passion for that and I've met people in the space. But all that is to say, like, that is a great opportunity and a great support for what I did in college and a great experience. But we all know that for the vast majority of kids, and that's not going to be your end result. So to have private equity or sort of this outside source come in that doesn't come from higher education, that doesn't have the same philosophy and mindset on what college is supposed to be, sees it as a plus and a minus on their profit and loss sheet. And if they have to cut away opportunities for kids down the depth chart or in other sports to make a dollar because that's what their goal is to do, I think you just have two very competing philosophies meeting in the middle, and you have 18 to 20-year-old kids that are the fallout from that essentially. And I think if you looked at it objectively in that sense, like these two things don't mesh in my mind. Like maybe you do it at a school level, I don't know on that front, but like that's crazy to me to have that sort of mindset of private equity combined with what is supposed to be the most, I would argue, kind of developmentally impactful part of a young adult's life. Like that ethically seems wild to me that we would open up that can of worms for people. So that is my closing thoughts, I guess you could say, on all of this. Those two things don't
Yeah.
vibe in my mind.
I agree with you. They don't. I remain painfully optimistic for things in the future on college sports, but a lot of those things are yet to be determined. But we appreciate everyone for watching, listening, subscribing, all the great stuff, commenting on the shows and paying attention to these topics as we pay attention to them as well. We're going to keep, our finger on the pulse of how private equity develops and how things with the House case with the DOJ and Department of Education stepping in, how those things develop. As I said, we appreciate you guys watching, listening, commenting, and subscribing to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. And hopefully you guys read the articles of the reference material that is in the summary section of this episode and the previous one as well. We will see you guys next time on the Athletes to Athletes podcast.